So, it's just scary, isn't it? Hello, Mr. Pike. Good to see you. Hi guys, how you doing? Everyone's eagerly waiting. Yeah, so am I. I'm so scared. I'm so nervous. I've never done any of this live stuff before. Trying to coordinate it. I've got my phone, I've got my laptop. Hi Jacob. I know I've got children watching. I know I've got children from school. It's a bit daunting, to say the least. But we're going to give it a go. We're going to try and get through over the next couple of days. Warhorse. Good book. Hopefully you're quite keen to hear it. I am losing my voice a tiny little bit, but we've got plenty of water. We can get through this. I have tabbed it at like chapter 5, so try to break up the chapters according to how many days we're going to read it. I don't know if it will last 5 days. I just wanted to give people a chance to hear a story. I've also put on the event to donate to an NHS cause. I thought, if people are going to watch me, I might as well get them to cough up some money for a good cause. So please feel free to donate on there. I know I will be. I've not done it yet, but I will do it later. So please, crack on. I'll wait for a few more people, I guess. I know there's lots of people quite eager to join. Quite scary. Hello, Wendy. How are we? Oh, this is quite weird, isn't it? So yeah, Warhorse. Should we get started? People are sharing it. This is scary. I don't like this. Anyway, right. Warhorse. Is that backwards? Don't know. Chapter 1. My earliest memories are a confusion of hilly fields and damp, dark stables, and rats that scampered along the beams above my head. But I remember well enough the day of the horse sale. The terror of it stayed with me all my life. I was not yet 6 years old, a gangling, leggy colt who had never been further than a few feet from his mother. We were parted that day in the terrible hubbub of the auction ring, and I was never to see her again. She was a fine working farm horse, getting on in years, but with all the strength and stamina of an Irish draft horse quite evident in her fore and hind quarters. She was sold within minutes, and before I could follow her through the gates, she was whisked out of the ring and away. But somehow I was more difficult to dispose of. Perhaps it was the wild look in my eye as I circled the ring in a desperate search for my mother, or perhaps it was that none of the farmers and gypsies there were looking for a spindly-looking half-thoroughbred colt. But whatever the reason, they were a long time haggling over how little I was worth before I heard the hammer go down and I was driven out through the gates into a pen outside. Not bad for 3 guineas, is he? Are you, my little firebrand? Not at all. The voice was harsh and thick with drink, and it belonged quite evidently to my owner. I shall not call him my master, for only one man was ever my master. My owner had a rope in his hand, and was clambering into the pen, followed by 3 or 4 of his red-faced friends. Each one carried a rope. They had taken off their hats and jackets and rolled up their sleeves. And they were all laughing as they came towards me. I had as yet been touched by no man, and backed away from them until I felt the bars of the pen behind me, and I could go no further. They seemed to lunge at me all at once, but they were slow, and I managed to slip past them and into the middle of the pen, where I turned to face them again. They had stopped laughing now. I screamed for my mother, and heard her reply echoing in the far distance. It was towards that cry that I bolted, half charging, half jumping the rails, so that I caught off my foreleg as I tried to clamber over and was stranded there. I was grabbed roughly by the mane and tail and felt a rope tighten round my neck before I was thrown to the ground and held there with a man sitting, it seemed, on every part of me. I struggled until I was weak, kicking out violently every time I felt them relax, but they were too many and too strong for me. I felt the halter slip over my head and tighten around my neck and face. "So you're quite a fighter, are you?" said my owner, tightening the rope and smiling through gritted teeth. "I like a fighter, but I'll break you one way or another. Quite a little frightening cock you are, but you'll be eating out of my hand quick as a twick." I was dragged along the lanes, tied on a short rope to the tailboard of a farm cart, so that every twist and turn wrenched at my neck. By the time we reached the farm lane and rumbled over the bridge into the stable yard that was to become my home, I was soaked with exhaustion, and the halter had rubbed my face raw. My one consolation, as I was hauled to the stables that first evening, was the knowledge that I was not alone. The old horse that had been pulling the cart all the way back from the market was led to the stable next to mine. As she went in, she stopped to look over the door and nickered gently. I was about to venture away from the back of my stable when my new owner brought his crop down to the side with such a vicious blow that I recoiled again and huddled into the corner against the wall. "Get in there, you old ratbag," he bellowed. "Proper nuisance you are, Zoe, and I don't want you teaching this young un your old tricks." But in that short moment I had caught a glimpse of kindness and sympathy from that old mare that cooled my panic and soothed my spirit. I was left there with no water and no food while he stumbled across the cobbles and up to the farmhouse beyond. There was a sound of slamming doors and raised voices before I heard footsteps running back across the yard and excited voices coming closer. 2 heads appeared at my door. One was that of a young boy who looked at me for a long time, considering me carefully before his face broke into a beaming smile. "Mother," he said deliberately, "that will be a wonderful and brave horse. Look how he holds his head. And then look at him, Mother. He's wet through to the skin. I'll have to rub him down." "But your father said leave him, Albert," said the boy's mother. "Said it would do him good to be left alone." "He told you not to touch him." "Mother," said Albert, slipping back the bolts on the stable door, "when father's drunk he doesn't know what he's saying or what he's doing. He's always drunk on market days. You've told me often enough not to pay him any account when he's like that. You feed up old Zoe, Mother, while I see to it. Oh, isn't he grand, Mother? He's red almost. Red Bay, you'd call him, wouldn't you? And that cross down his nose is perfect. Have you ever seen a horse with a white cross like that? Have you ever seen such a thing? I shall ride this horse when he's ready. I shall ride him everywhere, and there won't be a horse to touch him. Not in the whole parish. Not in the whole country." "You're barely past 13, Albert," said his mother from the next stable. "He's too young, and you're too young. And anyway, father says you're not to touch him. So don't come crying to me if he catches you in there." "But why the devil did he buy him, Mother?" Albert asked. "It was a calf we wanted, wasn't it? That's what he went to the market for, wasn't it? A calf to suck old Celandine?" I don't know, dear. Your father's not himself when he's like that," his mother said softly. "He says that Farmer Easton was bidding for the horse, and you know what he thinks of that man after that Barney over the fencing. I should imagine he bought it just to deny him." "Well, that's what it looks like to me." "Well, I'm glad he did, Mother," said Albert, walking slowly towards me, pulling off his jacket. "Drunk or not, it's the best thing he ever did." "Don't speak about like that to your father, Albert. He's been through a lot. It's not right," said his mother, but her words lacked conviction. Albert was about the same height as me, and talked so gently as he approached that I was immediately calmed down and not a little intrigued. and so stood where I was against the wall. I jumped at first when he touched me, but I could see at once that he meant no harm. He smoothed my back first and then my neck, talking all the while what a fine time we could have together, how I grew up to be the smartest horse in the whole wide world, and how we would go hunting together. After a bit, he began to rub me gently with his coat. He rubbed me until I was dry, and then dabbed salt water into my face where the skin had been rubbed raw. He brought in some sweet hay and a bucket of cool, deep water. I do not believe he stopped talking all the time. As he turned to go out of the stable, I called out to him to thank him, and he seemed to understand, for he smiled broadly and stroked my nose. "We'll get along, you and I," he said kindly. "I shall call you Joey, only because it rhymes with Zoe, and then maybe, yes maybe, because it suits you. I'll be out again in the morning. And don't worry, I'll look after you, I promise you that. Sweet dreams, Joey." "You should never talk to horses, Albert," said his mother from outside. "They never understand you. They're stupid creatures, obstinate and stupid. That's what your father says. He's known horses all of his life." "Father just doesn't understand them," said Albert. "I think he's frightened of them." I went over to the door and watched Albert and his mother walking away and up to the darkness. I knew then that I had found a friend for life, that there was an instinctive and immediate bond of trust and affection between us. Next to me, Zoe leant over the door and tried to touch me, but our noses would not quite meet. Messed that bit up. Chapter 2. Hello that have joined. Chapter 2. Through the long hard winters and hazy summers that followed, Albert and I grew up together. A yearling colt and a young lad have more in common than awkward gawkishness. Whenever he was not in school in the village, or out at work with his father on the farm, he would lead me out over the fields and down to the flat, thistly marsh by the Torridge River. Here on the only level ground on the farm he began my training, just walking and trotting up and down, and later on lunging me first one way and then the other. On the back to the farm he would allow me to follow at my own speed, and I learnt to come at his whistle, not out of obedience, but out of because I wanted to be with him. His whistle imitated the stuttering call of an owl. It was a call I never refused, and one I would never forget. Old Zoe, my other companion, was often away all day ploughing and harrowing, cutting and turning out of the farm, and so I was left on my own much of the time. Out in the fields in the summertime, this was bearable because I could always hear her working and call out to her from time to time, but shut in the loneliness of the stable in the winter, all day could pass without seeing or hearing a soul, unless Albert came for me. As Albert had promised, it was he who cared for me and protected me all he could from his father, and his father did not turn out to be the monster I expected. Most of the time he ignored me, and if he did look at me over, it was always from a distance. From time to time he could even be quite friendly, but I was never quite able to trust him, not after our first encounter. I would never let him come too close, and would always back off and shy away to the other end of the field and put old Zoe between us. On every Tuesday, however, Albert's father could still be relied upon to get drunk, and on his return Albert would find some pretext to be with me to ensure he never came near me. On one such autumn evening, about 2 years after I came to the farm, Albert was up in the village church ringing the bells. As a precaution, he had me put in the stable with old Zoe, as he always did on Tuesday evenings. "You'll be safer together. Father, won't you come in and bother you? Not if you're together," he'd say. And then he'd lean over the stable door and lecture us about the intricacies of bell ringing and how he had been given a big tenor bell because they thought he was man enough already to handle it, and that in no time he'd be the biggest lad in the village. My Albert was proud of his bell-ringing prowess, and Zoe and I stood head to tail in the darkening stable, lulled by the 6 bells ringing out over the dusky fields from the church. We knew we had every right to be proud. It was the noblest of music for everyone. They only have to listen. I must have been standing asleep, for I do not recall hearing him approach. But quite suddenly there was a dancing light of a lantern at the stable door, and the bolts were pulled back. I thought at first it might be Albert, but the bells were still ringing, and then I heard the voice that was unmistakably that of Albert's father, on a Tuesday night after market. He hung the lantern above the door and came towards me. There was a whippy stick in his hand, and he was staggering around the stable towards me. "So, my proud little devil," he said, the threat in his voice quite undistinguished. "I've a bet on that I can't have you pulling a plough inside a week. Farmer Easton and the others at the George think I can't handle you, but I'll show them. You've been mollycoddled enough, and the time has come for you to earn your keep. I'm going to try some collars on you this evening, find one that fits, and then tomorrow we'll start ploughing. Now we can do it the nice way or the nasty way. Give me trouble, and I'll whip you till you bleed." Old Zoe knew his mood well enough and whined her warning, backing off into the dark recesses of the stable. She need not to have warned me, for I sensed his intention. One look at the raised stick sent my heart thumping wildly with fear. Terrified, I knew I could not run, for there was nowhere to go. So I put my back to him and lashed out behind me. I felt my hooves strike home. I heard a cry of pain and turned to see him crawling out of the stable door, dragging one leg stiffly behind him and muttering the words of cruel vengeance. That next morning both Albert and his father came out together to the stables. His father was walking with a pronounced limp. They were carrying a collar each, and I could see that Albert had been crying, for his pale cheeks were stained with tears. They stood together at the stable door. I noticed with infinite pride and pleasure that Albert was already taller than his father, whose face was drawn and lined with pain. "If your mother hadn't begged me last night, Albert, I'd have shot that horse on the spot. He could have killed me. Now I'm warning you. If that animal's not ploughing straight as an arrow inside a week, he'll be sold on. And that's a promise. It's up to you. You say you can't deal with him, and I'll give you just one chance. He won't let me go near him. He's wild and vicious. And unless you make it your business to tame him and train him inside a week, he's going. Do you understand? That horse has to earn his keep like everyone else around here. I don't care how showy he is. That horse has got to learn how to work. And I'll promise you another thing, Albert. If I have to lose that bet, then he has to go." He dropped the collar on the ground and turned on his heel to go. "Father," said Albert, with resolution in his voice, "I'll train Joey. I'll train him to plough all night. But you must promise never to raise a stick to him again. He can't be handled that way." "I know him, Father. I know him as if he was my own brother." "You train him, Albert. You handle him. Don't care how you do it. I don't want to know," said his father dismissively. "I'll not go near the brute again. I'll shoot him first." But when Albert came into the stable, he was not to smooth me, as he usually did, nor talk to me gently. Instead, he walked up to me and looked me hard in the eye. "That was devilish stupid," he said sternly. "If you want to survive, Joey, you'll have to learn. You're never to kick out at anyone again." He means it. He'd have you shot just like that if he hadn't been for Mother. It was Mother who saved you. He wouldn't listen to me, and he never will. So never again, Joey. Never. His voice changed now, and he spoke more like himself. "We have 1 week, Joey. 1 week to get you ploughing. I know with all of that thoroughbred in you, you may think it beneath you, but that's what you're going to have to do. Old Zoe and me, we're going to train you, and it'll be devilish hard work, even harder for you because you're not quite the right shape for it. Then there's not enough of you yet. You won't much like me by the end of it, Joey, but Father means what he says. He's a man of his word. Once he's made up his mind, then that's that. He'd sell you on, even shoot you rather than lose a bet, and that's for sure." That same morning, with the mists still clinging to the fields, and linked side by side to dear old Zoe in the collar that hung loose around her shoulders, I was led out to look onto a long close, and my training as a farmhouse began. As we took the strain together for the first time, the collar rubbed at my skin, and my feet sank deep into the soft ground with the effort behind it. Albert was shouting almost continuously, flashing a whip at me whenever I hesitated or went off line. whenever I felt I was not giving it my best, and he knew. This was a different Albert, gone were the gentle words and the kindnesses of the past. His voice had a harshness and sharpness to it, and it would brook no refusal on my part. Beside me, old Zoe leant into a collar and pulled silently, head down, digging in with her feet, for her sake and for my own sake, for Albert's too. I lent my weight into my collar and began to pull. I was to learn during that week the rudiments of ploughing like a farm horse. Every muscle I had ached with the strain of it, but after a night's good rest, stretched out in the stable, I was fresh again, and ready for work in the next morning. Each day as I progressed, and we began to plough more as a team, Albert used the whip less and less and spoke more gently to me again, until finally at the end of the week I was sure I had all but regained his affection. Then one afternoon, after we finished the headland around the long close, he unhitched the plough and put an arm around each of us. "It's all right now. You've done it, my beauties, you've done it," he said. "I didn't tell you, because I didn't want to put you off, but Father and Farmer Easton have been watching us from the house this afternoon." He scratched us behind the ears and smoothed our noses. "Father's won his bet, and he told me at breakfast that if we finished the field today, he'd forget all about the incident, and that you could stay on. Joey, you've done it, my beauty, and I'm so proud of you I could kiss you, you old silly. But I won't do that, not with them watching. I'll let you stay in now. I'm sure he will. He's a man of his word, is my father, you can be sure of that, long as he's sober." It was some months later, on the way back from cutting the hay in the great meadow along the sunken leafy lane that led up to the farmyard, that Albert first talked to us of the war. His whistling stopped in mid-tune. "Mother says there's likely to be a war," he said sadly. "I don't know what that's about. Something about some old duke that's been shot somewhere. Can't think of why that should matter to anyone, but she says we'll be in it all the same. But it won't affect us, not down here. We'll just go on the same. At 15 I'm too young to go anyway." Well, that's what she said. But I tell you, Joey, if there is a war, I'd want to go. I think I'd make a good soldier, don't you? Look fine in uniform, wouldn't I? And I've always wanted to march to the beat of a band. Can you imagine that, Joey? Come to that, you'd make a good war horse yourself, wouldn't you? If you ride as well as you pull, and I know you will. We'd make quite the pair. God help the Germans if they ever have to fight the two of us. One hot summer evening, after a long and dusty day in the fields, I was deep into the mash and oats, with Albert still rubbing me down with straw and talking on the abundance of good straw they'd have for the winter months, and about how good the wheat straw would be for the thatching they would be doing, when I heard his father's heavy steps coming across the yard towards us. He was calling out as he came. "Mother," he shouted, "Mother, come out, Mother." It was his sane voice, his sober voice, and that voice held no fear for me. "It's war, Mother. I've just heard it in the village. Postman came in this afternoon with the news. The devils have marched into Belgium. It's certain for sure now. We declared war yesterday at 11 o'clock. We're at war with the Germans. We'll give them such a hiding as they won't ever raise their fists again to anyone. Be over in months. It's always been the same. Just because the British line's sleeping, they think he's dead. We'll teach them a thing or two. Mother, we'll teach them a lesson they'll never forget." Albert had stopped brushing me and dropped the straw on the ground. We moved towards the stable door. His mother was standing up on the steps by the door of the farmhouse. She had her hand to her mouth. "Oh, dear God," she said softly. "Oh, dear God." Chapter 3. Warhorse, for those of you who's joined. I hope it saves, so you can rewatch it. Anyway. Chapter 3. Gradually, during that last summer on the farm, so gradually that I'd hardly noticed it, Albert had began riding me out over the farm to check the sheep. Old Zoe would follow behind, and I would stop every now and then to be sure she was still with us. I do not even remember the first time he put a saddle on me, but at some time he must have done so, for by the time the war was declared that summer, Albert was riding me out to the sheep each morning, and almost every evening after his work. I came to know every lane in the parish, every whispering oak tree, and every banging gate. He would splash through the stream under the innocent copse, and thunder up ferny peace beyond. With Albert riding me, there was no hanging on the reins, no jerking on the bit in my mouth, but always a gentle squeeze with the knees and a touch with heels was enough to tell me that what he wanted of me. I think he could have ridden me even without that. So well did we come to understand each other. Whenever he was not talking to me, he would whistle or sing all the time, and that seemed somehow to reassure me. The war hardly touched us on the farm to start with. With more straw still to turn and stack for the winter, old Zoe and I were led out every morning early to the fields to work. To our great relief, Albert had now taken over most of the horsework on the farm, leaving his father to see to the pigs and the bullocks, to check out to the sheep, and to mend the fences and dig the ditches around the farm, so that we scarcely saw him for more than a few minutes a day. Yet, in spite of the normality of the routine, there was a growing tension on the farm, and I began to feel an acute sense of foreboding. There would be long and heated exchanges in the yard, sometimes between Albert's father and mother, but more often, strangely enough, between Albert and his mother. "You mustn't blame him, Albert," she said one morning, turning on him angrily outside the stable door. "He did it all for you, you know. When Lord Denton offered to sell him the farm 10 years ago, he took out the mortgage so that you'd have a farm on your own when you grew up. And it's the mortgage that wears him sick and makes him drink. So if he isn't himself from time to time, you've no call to keep on about him. He's not as well as he used to be, and he can't put in the work in the farm like he used to. He's over 50, you know. Children don't think of their fathers as being old or young. It's the war too. The war worries him, Albert. He worries prices will be falling back, and I think his heart of hearts he feels he should be soldiering in France, but he's too old for that. You've got to try to understand him, Albert. He deserves that much." "You don't drink, Mother," Albert replied vehemently, "and you've got worries just like he has. And anyway, if you did drink, wouldn't you get at me as he does? I do all the work I can, and more, and still he never stops complaining that this isn't done, that isn't done. He complains every time I take Joey out in the morning. He doesn't even want me to go off bell ringing once a week. It's not reasonable, Mother." "I know that, Albert," his mother said more gently now, taking his hand in both of hers. "But you must try to see the good in him. He's a good man, he really is. You remember him that way, don't you?" "Yes, Mother, I remember him like that," Albert acknowledged. "But if he only wouldn't keep on about Joey as he does. After all, Joey works for his living now, and he has to have time off to enjoy himself, just as I do." "Of course, dear," she said, taking his elbow and walking him up towards the farmhouse. "But you know how he feels about Joey, don't you? He bought him in on a feat of pique and regretted it ever since. As he says, we only really need one horse for the farm work, and that horse of yours eats money. That's what worries him. Farmers and horses, it's always the same. My father was like it too. But he'll come round if you're kind with him. I know he will." But Albert and his father scarcely spoke to each other any more these days, and Albert's mother was used more and more by both as a go-between, as a negotiator. It was on a Wednesday morning, with the war but a few weeks old, that Albert's mother was again arbitrating between them in the yard outside. As usual, Albert's father had come home drunk from the market the night before. He said he had forgotten to take back the saddleback boar they had borrowed to serve the sows and gilts. He had told Albert to do it, but Albert had objected strongly, and an argument was brewing. Albert's father said that he had business to attend to, and Albert maintained he had the stables to clean out. "Won't take you half an hour, dear, to drive the bull back down to the valley to Fursdon," Albert's mother said swiftly, trying to soften the inevitable. "All right then," Albert conceded, as he always did when his mother intervened, for he hated to upset her. "I'll do it for you, Mother, but on the condition I can take Joey out this evening. I want to hunt him this winter, and I have to get him fit." Albert's father stayed silent and thin-lipped, and I noticed that when he was looking straight at me, Albert turned, patting me gently on the nose, picked up a stick from the pile of lightings up against the woodshed, and made his way down towards the piggery. A few minutes later, I saw him driving a great black-white boar down the farm track towards the lane. I called out after him, but he did not turn round. Now if Albert's father came to the stable at all, it was always to lead out old Zoe. He left me alone these days. He would throw a saddle onto Zoe, out into the yard, and ride out to the hills above the farmhouse to check the sheep. So it was nothing special when he came out to the stable that morning and led Zoe out. But when it came back to the stable afterwards and began to sweet-talk me and held out a bucket of sweet-smelling oats, I was immediately suspicious. But the oats and my own inquisitiveness overcame my better judgment, and he was able to slip a halter over my head before I could pull away. His voice, however, was unusually gentle and kind, and he tightened the halter and reached out slowly to stroke my neck. "You'll be all right, old son," he said softly. "You'll be all right. They'll look after you. Promised they would. And I need the money, Joey. I need the money bad." Chapter 4. Chapter 4. Tying a long rope to the halter, he walked me out of the stable. I went with him because Zoe was out there looking back over the shoulder at me, and I was always happy to go somewhere, and with anyone as long as he was with me. All the while I noticed that Albert's father was speaking in a hushed voice and looking around like a thief. He must have known that I would follow old Zoe, for he roped me up to her to saddle and led us both quietly out of the yard, down the track, and over the bridge. Once in the lane, he mounted Zoe swiftly, and we trotted up the hill and into the village. He never spoke a word to either of us. I knew the road well enough, of course, for I had been there often enough with Albert, and indeed I loved going there because there was always other horses to meet and people to see. It was in the village, only a short time before that I had met my first motor car outside the post office, and I had stiffened with fear as it rattled past. But I had stood steady, and I remember that Albert had made a great fuss of me after that. But now as we neared the village, I could see that several motor cars were parked around the green, and there was a greater gathering of men and horses that I had ever seen. Excited as I was, I remember that the sense of deep apprehension came over me as we trotted up into the village. There were men in khaki uniforms everywhere, and then as Albert's father dismounted and led us up past the church towards a green and military band struck up a rousing, pounding march. The pulse of the great bass drum beat out through the village, and there were children everywhere, some marching up and down with broomsticks over their shoulders, and some leaning out with flags. As we approached the flagpole in the centre of the green, where the Union Jack hung limp in the sun against the white pole, an officer pushed through the crowd towards us. He was tall and elegant in his jodhpurs and Sam Brown belt, with a silver sword in his side. He shook Albert's hand. "I told you I'd come, Captain Nichols, sir," said Albert's father. "It's because I need the money, you understand. Wouldn't part with a horse like this, unless I had to." "Well, farmer," said the officer, nodding his appreciation as he looked me over, "I thought you'd be exaggerating when we talked in the George last evening. Finest horse in the parish, you said. But then everyone says that. But this one is different, I can see that." And he smoothed my neck gently and scratched me behind the ears. Both his hand and his voice were kind, and I did not shrink away from him. "You're right, farmer. He'd make a fine mount for any regiment, and we'd be proud to have him. I wouldn't mind using him myself. No, I wouldn't mind at all. If he turns out to be all he looks, then he'd suit me well enough. Fine-looking animal, no question about it. £40 you'll pay me, Captain Nichols, like you promised yesterday." Albert's father said in a voice that was unnaturally low, almost as if he did not want to be heard by anyone else. "I can't let him go for a penny less. Man's got to live." "That's what I promised you last evening, farmer," Captain Nichols said, opening my mouth and examining my teeth. "He's a fine young horse, strong neck, sloping shoulder, straight fetlocks. Done much work, has he? Hunted him out yet, have you?" "My son rides him out every day," said Albert's father. "Goes like a racer, jumps like a hunter, he tells me." "Well," said the officer, "as long as our vet passes him as fit and in sound wind and limb, you'll have your £40 as we agreed." "I can't be long, sir," Albert's father said, glancing back over his shoulder. "I have to get back. I have my work to see to." "Well, we're busy recruiting in the village, as well as buying," said the officer. but we'll be as quick as we can for you. True, there's a lot of good men, more good men volunteers than there are good horses in these parts, and that vet doesn't have to examine the men, does he? You wait here. I'll be only a few minutes. Captain Nichols led me away through the archway opposite the public house and into the large garden, beyond where there were men in white coats and uniformed clerks sitting down at the table taking notes. I thought I heard old Zoe calling after me, so I shouted back to reassure her, for I felt no fear at this moment. I was too interested in what was going on around me. The officer talked to me gently as I walked away, so I went along most eagerly. The vet, a small bustling man with a bushy black moustache, prodded me all over, lifted me each of my feet to examine them, which I objected to, and then peered into my eyes and mouth, sniffing at my breath. Then I was trotted around and round the garden before he pronounced me as a perfect specimen. Sound as a bell, fit for anything, cavalry or artillery, were the words he used. No splints, no curbs, good feet and teeth. Buy him, Captain, he said. He's a good one. I was led back to Albert's father, who took the offered notes from Captain Nichols, stuffing them quickly into his trouser pocket. Look, you look after him, sir, he said. You'll see he comes no harm. My son's very fond of him, you see. He reached out and brushed my nose with his hand. There were tears filling my eyes, and at that moment he became almost like a likeable man for me. You'll be all right, old son, he whispered to me. You won't understand, and neither will Albert. But unless I sell you, I can't keep up with the mortgage, and we'll lose the farm. I've treated you bad. I've treated everyone bad. I know it, and I'm sorry for it. And he walked away from me, leading Zoe behind. His head was lowered, and he looked suddenly a shrunken man. It was then that I fully realised I was being abandoned, and I began to neigh, a high-pitched cry of pain and anxiety that shrieked out throughout the village. Even old Zoe, obedient and placid as she always was, stopped and would not be moved on no matter how hard Albert's father pulled her. She turned, tossed up her head, and shouted her farewell, but her cries became weaker as she finally dragged away out of my sight. Kind hands tried to contain me and to console me, but I was unconsolable. I had just about given up all hope when I saw my Albert running up towards me through the crowd, his face red with exertion. The band had stopped playing. The entire village looked on as he came up and put his arms around my neck. He's sold him, hasn't he? He said quietly, looking up at Captain Nichols, who was holding me. Joey is my horse. He's my horse, and he always will be, no matter who buys him. I can't stop my father from selling him, but if Joey goes with you, I go. I want to join up and stay with him. You've the right spirit for a soldier, young man, said the officer, taking off his peaked cap and wiping his brow with the back of his hand. And he had black curly hair, and a kind open look on his face. You've the spirit, but you haven't the years. You're too young, and you know it. 17's the youngest we take. Come back in a year or so, and then we'll see. I look 17, Albert said, almost pleading. I'm bigger than most 17-year-olds. But even as he spoke, he could see he was getting nowhere. You won't take me then, sir, not even as a stable boy. I'll do anything. What's your name, young man? Captain Nichols asked. Narracott, sir. Albert Narracott. Well, Mr. Narracott, I'm sorry I can't help you. The officer shook his head and replaced his cap. I'm sorry, young man. Regulations. But don't you worry about your Joey. I shall take good care of him until you are ready to join us. You've done a fine job on him. You should be proud of him. He's a fine, fine horse. But your father needed the money for the farm, and a farm won't run without money. You must know that. I like your spirit. So when you're old enough, you must come and join the yeomanry. We need men like you, and it will be a long war, I fear, longer than people think. Mention my name. I'm Captain Nichols, and I'd be proud to have you with us. There's no way then? Albert asked. There's nothing I can do? Nothing, said Captain Nichols. Your horse belongs to the army now, and you're too young to join up. Don't you worry. We'll look after him. I'll take personal care of him, and that's a promise. Albert wriggled my nose for me as often as he did, and stroked my ears. He was trying to smile, but could not. I'll find you again, you old silly, he said quietly. Wherever you are, I'll find you, Joey. Take good care of him, please, sir, till I find him again. There's not another horse like him, not in the world. You'll find that out. Say you promise. I promise, said Captain Nichols. I'll do everything I can. And Albert turned and went away through the crowd until I could see him no more. Chapter 5. We've made it. Just. I can feel my voice going. So I'm going to stop there. And hopefully it will save. And then I'll do another live video tomorrow at 7:30 UK time. Not Belgian time, as it said on the event. So thanks for watching. Yeah, thank you.